Hello, it's David Parrish, and welcome to the World Missions and Evangelism video blog. And we are, for the last several weeks, talking about the story of the church planting movement that's happening in Honduras. Today, there are nearly 700 groups and churches in Honduras and a few in some of the surrounding countries that have been multiplying rapidly over these last few years. But this whole project began in the year 2008. And I've been telling the story, a little bit about the background. Overall, our whole big picture here, I've been calling it Lessons from the Journey. What have we been learning as we've been pursuing a disciple-making movement strategy in Latin America? And so I wanted to tell the story. The reason I'm telling the story is this, because I want to be an inspiration and an encouragement to others that are involved anywhere in the world in making disciples, or in a disciple-making movement or church planting movement strategy. Whether it's here in the United States, where our office is, or whether it's in Latin America, where our primary project is, or whether it's anywhere else in the world. I want to tell the story so that you'll understand a little bit about the beginnings and the struggles and the movements forward, some of the setbacks, and the persistence that is necessary to see a great movement to Jesus Christ start among a people group or a nation or a region. And so we want to tell the story, not just the good part of the testimony. We want to tell everything. We want to talk about the struggles, and that's what we've been doing for several weeks. And if you look on our blog, you go to YouTube and you find my channel, David Parrish, the David Parrish channel, and kind of go scroll down. You can start from the beginning with Lessons from the Journey, and you can hear our whole story week by week by week. And we're telling this, number one, to the glory of God, because without Him, we can do nothing, and with Him, all things are possible. And this movement is really a work of God. But we want to talk about our journey as a mission organization, missionaries and a mission organization focused in this process. So that's what this is all about. Well, when we ended the last program, the last video blog, we talked to you about how that we had started the project, that our missionaries had moved there. They had begun to train some Hondurans, and they'd got some further training. And by the month of June 2009, there were 73 Discovery Bible Studies. Now, nobody had come to the Lord yet, but we had started Discovery Bible Studies, and some of them had multiplied, and altogether there were 73 Discovery Bible Studies in western Honduras. And then that's where we ended the story, because it was at that point that we entered a season of what you might call spiritual warfare. We were already in a season of spiritual warfare, but a season of even almost natural warfare and setback. Because on June the 28th, 2009, the government of Honduras was overthrown. This is not a political statement about that, whether it's good or bad. I'm just stating the fact that for the next 5 to 7 months, Honduras was like a powder keg ready to explode. And there actually were some small explosions. There were protests, there were marches, there were roadblocks, there were curfews, there were all kinds of things happened. It just so happened that on that date, June the 28th, 2009, that our team, which consisted at that time of 2 American missionaries and their wives and 3 Honduran men. I've told the story about how that team had formed earlier, and some of our team members had left, and we had 3 Honduran team members left, overseeing those 73 groups and continuing to try to mentor them. But when this happened, 2 of our 3 Honduran team members were on the eastern side of the country, visiting family. One of the team members had been in a motorcycle wreck. Our team was traveling by motorcycles, and he had had a bad motorcycle wreck. He had a very bad injured leg. He couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. And so he was at our base in western Honduras. The other 2 were in eastern Honduras. And this happened. Well, when this government overthrow happened, travel became difficult. It became dangerous to travel. There were roadblocks, curfews. And our two of our team members were literally, as it were, trapped on the eastern side of Honduras. Our third Honduran team member was laid up, injured, and couldn't get out to where those Bible studies were. And our two missionary families, Randy and Linda and Keith and Juanita Travis, were basically attacked by a mob in San Pedro Sula. They happened to have gone over to San Pedro Sula for some business, and when they started to leave, a mob came out after them. And to this day, we don't know why, but we do know that God delivered them. Miraculously, they were able to escape from this mob that would have beaten them and probably killed them. Well, they made their escape, and they were driving back to where our base was in western Honduras, and they called me. I was here in the U.S. I had just been there earlier that month before this happened, but I was home now in the U.S., and they called me, and I said, Randy, I think we don't know what's going to happen here. This thing could be very volatile. This could become civil war. I would like you guys to leave the country, you the two missionary families. I'd like y'all to cross the border into Guatemala, which they did in a couple of days. So they got safely out of there. Well, for the next 5 to 7 months, Honduras was a powder keg. And there were some people killed during that time, but they also had national elections during that time, and it was a very iffy time in that country. I want to talk to you in this video blog about persistence through setbacks. Persistence through setbacks leads to new open doors and breakthroughs. You know, when we're doing God's work, whether it's disciple making, church planting, mission work, whatever, the one thing that we don't get to determine is the overall circumstances of the world. You know, a lot of times as people are saying, I'm trying to do something for God, I'm trying to do a work, and then this happened, and 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 I can't do anything for God. Well, we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a very imperfect world. God made a perfect world, but sin has corrupted this world, and there's spiritual warfare. And sometimes governments get overthrown. Sometimes stock markets crash. Sometimes economies melt down. Sometimes wars happen. Sometimes there are Ebola outbreaks, and we can't control that. But what we can control in the midst of setbacks, in the midst of a tumultuous world, what we can control is a determination to not quit, but to continue to obey God and just to take the steps that are available. So what happened? Our missionaries were out of the country. They couldn't continue doing what they were doing. One of our men was laid up. He couldn't do anything. He was absolutely injured and recovering. The other two are trapped on the other side of the country. So we have 73 groups that nobody for months can get back to. And we have an injured team member, 2 team members trapped on the other side of the country, and the missionary team had to evacuate. What do? What you do is you do the thing that is available to you. You say, we're not quitting. We're going to take this time. We're going to make the best use of our time. So we made 3 or 4 decisions. Number 1, Keith and Juanita Travis stayed in South Mexico, and while they were there, spread the vision of this strategy among people in South Mexico. Randy and Linda Travis came back into the United States, and I told them, I said, let's use this time to do a professional recording of the Bible studies. We were using the recorded scriptures and Bible studies, and so we brought a man from Mexico to the United States, and we went into a recording studio, and we recorded and made a professional, very beautiful, good recording of these Bible studies to be used in Honduras. And then we also got a hold of the Mega Voice technology and learned how to combine these recordings with the Mega Voice technology. And so we worked on that and those things in July and August and early September of that year. Meanwhile, we sent word to our men that were on the eastern side of Honduras, and we said, you don't even try to get back home. It's too dangerous. But where you're at, begin to cast the vision there. Begin to tell people. Begin to make disciples there. You can't get back to where you were working, so keep doing just do the work there in eastern Honduras. And meanwhile, our man that was laid up and couldn't do anything, he had a brother named Oscar. And he got a hold of his brother who lived in the western Honduras. He said, let me tell you what I'm doing. And his brother came over. He gave his brother a little bit of training, and his brother began to go out and make disciples in the field where we were working. And so what happened was, in every area, we were spread out in the United States, Mexico, eastern and western Honduras, but we were able to say, even though we can't do what we were doing, we can continue to work here. And that's what happened for the next 5 to 7 months. During that 5-month period, one time in September, I think it was, we had been talking about these recorded Bible studies, and we were just learning about the Mega Voice, so we were using cassette players and old cassette tapes. And I had some people that I met, and several people donated cassette tapes, cassette players, and even cassette duplicating machines. And we loaded all kinds of equipment in a truck that Richard Crowder had, and Richard Crowder drove from the United States with all those supplies to South Mexico, picked up Keith Travis, and they drove across Guatemala and drove back in to Honduras to deliver these recordings. We had made the recordings in July and August. We put them on cassette tapes and shipped them overland down there, and they began to put these resources into the hands of the guys that were working. Randy flew to Honduras and trained some people. He trained Oscar, Jacobo's brother, and Oscar began to work. Then, through the men that were basically trapped on the eastern side of Honduras, he found out there's a number of people over here that want to learn about this strategy. And so Randy said, I feel like we need to do a training over there. Randy flew back home. Keith and Brother Crowder drove out, left the country overland, and Randy flew back home again. This is in the midst of this turmoil. And Randy says, this is going to be a dangerous trip, but I'm going to fly in November, and we're going to pick up some people in western Honduras, and we're going to make our way over there to where those other people are, and we're going to train them. And that's exactly what they did. And in November of 2009, we did our first training. The only time we had trained anybody in this strategy was when our initial team was trained in the summer of 2008. But now in November of 2009, in the midst of this uproar, we began to train others in the same strategy. And one of those people that we trained became the most effective church planter that we ever have worked with, up to and including today. He was trained during that time in November in the Department of Olancho. We didn't know what was going to come out of all that. Randy then flew home, and we had to see what's going to happen. We began to get reports that groups were starting, but the team was small, and they weren't able to mentor, and because of the travel restrictions and so forth, they weren't able to get out into all the villages and so forth. By the time the dust cleared in January of 2009, we didn't know where things stood. We had heard reports, some good reports of a bunch of groups starting, but we really didn't know where it stood. So Randy and Linda and Keith and Juanita made it back in. The government had stabilized. The new president was in office in January, so in February they moved back. By now, Jacobo's leg had healed. Oscar's now on our team. Our other team members are able to come back, and the team was able to reform again. But now the question is, where do things stand? And so they begin to do an assessment. And when it was all said and done, by the middle of March, early March, something like that, of 2010, we discovered that at that point, of our 73 groups, we could only find 37 of them. And it looked like a setback. It looked like a major setback. There had been 73 groups in June 2009. Now there are only 37 groups in March of 2010. Now I tell that part of the story, and you know what? I'm actually grateful to be able to tell that part of this story, because I think it's important that people that are involved in disciple-making movements, disciple-making ministries, need to understand that everything about your obedience to God is not going to be just smooth sailing and just amazing trend upward. You know, there's people that they believe if God's really in something, it'll just be blessed, blessed, blessed. There'll never be any problems. Well, I'm going to tell you, try that theory out with the Apostle Paul. I mean, according to that theory, the Apostle Paul was out of God's will like constantly, because he was constantly being arrested, beaten, shipwrecked. Things happened. He went through things, but he persisted. And the result was that a Christ movement exploded across the Roman Empire. The ultimate result was a movement that's still moving. But were there setbacks? Were there problems? Were there trials? Were there government overthrows? Yes. And the same thing happened with us in this project. It wasn't easy to go through those months where everything. We got back into some of the villages where we had started a group, and not only was the group gone, the village was gone. Nobody was there anymore. The whole place had been abandoned in the midst of all this stuff, and in the midst of some other things like some seasonal workings and so forth. And so it was discouraging, because we lifted up our head in March of 2010, and at this point we've been working there for almost 2 years, since we started training people initially in May of 2008. So almost 2 years later, there are 37 groups. And so the question is, what do you do? And the answer is, we persisted until the overthrow. We've persisted through the overthrow, and now the dust is cleared. We're going to keep persisting. And this is where you have to have inside of your spirit the knowledge that you have heard from God, and that this is God's work that you're doing. This is not man's work. This is God's work, and you're going to go forward with God's work, and you're not going to quit. And God put that kind of determination in us, and we said, not that it was easy, but from the Lord, we know He gave us that kind of determination, and we said, we're not going to quit. What are we going to do? We're going to keep working. Go back. Continue to work. The amazing thing is this, that literally by the summer of that same year, by July of 2010, so March, April, May, June, July, within 4 months, there were 160 groups. It was back from 37 to 160. So how in the world did you go from 73 to 37 to 160, and it went from 37 to 160 groups in 4 months? How in the world did that happen? Well, number one, what we didn't realize was that in the midst of that uproar, even though some groups shut down and new groups opened up and some of them shut down, what we didn't realize that the seed had been sown. And all of a sudden we began to find out that some of the seed that had been planted during that 7-month period was beginning suddenly to bear fruit. And our group our leaders just wouldn't quit. And they just said, you know what, we're going back. And sure enough, they went back to some of the places and found, oh wait, these people are, the village is gone, now they're coming back. And things were able to be, some of them, not all of them, but some of them put back together. And within 4 months, we went from 37 groups. So we went 0 groups in May of 2008, 25 groups in December of 2008, 73 groups in June 2009, down to 37 groups in March 2010, and 4 months later, 160 groups in July 2010. Now, the lesson is there are circumstances that come. There's warfare. You don't get to choose your circumstances. All you get to choose is whether you keep believing God's word and continue persistence with His call. Well, we'll take it from there, because what we didn't realize was that over the next year, between July of 2010 and the following April, there wasn't going to be a lot of numerical increase over those next few months as far as numbers of groups. But what we were learning to do was to be mentors to groups and leaders that we had met. We were learning the lesson over the next several months of mentoring. And we did it right a lot of times, and sometimes we messed up, but we were learning the lessons of how to be mentors. And mentoring is a great principle in any church planting or disciple making movement. We'll talk more about that in next week's video blog. Thanks so much for watching, and remember, get a word from God, keep believing it, and don't quit. God bless you. Have a great day.